Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin, and I'd like to share a fascinating Bigfoot encounter I received some time ago. Here it goes. Hey Bob, I discovered your channel because my son adores your videos. A combination of your content and my kids' ramblings got me thinking about a weird occurrence that happened when I was 18 years old. It happened on September 1st, 2001. I remember the date well because it was right before 9/11. I was at my friend's wedding, technically my older brother's friend, but we were all close. We're all from Ohio, but the wedding was at this scenic field in southwestern Pennsylvania. Everyone else was staying the night there, for obvious reasons, but I decided to head back to my place that night, which was 30 miles outside of Canton, and I kind of had that drunk ambition that typically doesn't end well. But I wanted to make the 2-hour drive while I was feeling good, as I strongly suspected it would be no fun in the morning. 2001 may not have been that long ago, but I promise you it was a very different time. I was all prepared to tell you that I don't know exactly where it happened, but I looked at Google Earth and it took me all of 5 minutes to figure it out. This happened right before I entered West Virginia, so I'm fairly certain I was on Beam Ridge Road. This was before GPSs and stuff. At least, before everyone had them. I basically knew to head west until I started recognizing stuff. To be honest, I was pretty buzzed. I wouldn't dream of driving drunk now, and I would not be happy if I caught my kids doing it, though hopefully I have a few years before I have to start worrying about that. But it didn't seem like a big deal at the time because I was a teenager, or maybe it was just a different time. Who knows? Anyway, I didn't know it yet, but I was coming up on the border with West Virginia. I was taking the back roads west, because I wanted to stay off the beaten path until I finished my refreshments. If you know what I mean. This is stuff I can't even imagine doing today. But hey, you're only young once. I had just ditched my empty, and then literally a minute later, bam, I see a state police cruiser nestled behind a clump of trees. I slowed down, and he didn't pursue. I thought I was good, and I continued driving 39 miles per hour for the longest minute of my life, and then I saw him light up behind me. The speed limit was 45, and I had only been going a couple miles over that when I saw him. But there were lots of houses and driveways on that winding road, so maybe even a little over 45 was too fast for night. Or maybe I was swerving. But I don't know. To this day, I don't know what I got pulled over for. And at that point, I had never even been pulled over. I just kind of froze, staring forward, wondering if this was the kind of thing where I'd just get a ticket, or if I'd go to jail. Would they field test me? Are they going to make me blow into the thingy? Should I refuse? I didn't know. I was a mix of resigned to my fate, and yet weirdly confident that I'd be fine. When you're young, you're lucky, right? The cop parked a good 25 or 30 feet behind me, and we just sat there for a long time, for anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes, but it felt like a lot longer than that. And during that time, any bit of positivity that I had been holding on to had vanished. I didn't even have any gum. You know when you're at that level of desperation that you begin to feel that you can alter reality by wishing? That's about where I was. I was just begging, go away, get a call, anything, but it didn't work. He got out of his car, and I saw his silly hat, and he started walking toward me. I kept my eyes forward, because of course analyzing the scene would be suspicious. He should have been nearly to my car, but then I heard his door slam, and it slammed hard. Then I risked a glance over my shoulder, and saw that he was nowhere to be seen. Maybe halfway to my car, he had realized that he'd forgotten his blowy thing, so he went back for it. But one would think he wouldn't shut, let alone slam his door just to grab something. I'm watching from my rearview mirror without moving my head, because of course you don't want the cop to know that you're paying attention, because that would seem suspicious. Then he shines his flashlight through the passenger side window. He was shining it 2/3 of the way between his car and mine, and past a ditch and then some weeds, and into the forest. The brush started maybe 20 feet from the road. His headlights were too bright for me to see through his windshield, but I'm guessing he had crawled to the passenger side seat and was spotlighting the woods to my right. Maybe it was because of my state of anxiety, or maybe it was because I really had to pee, but I felt like this was taking a silly amount of time. I had been pulled over for at least 5 minutes before he even got out of his car. Then when he finally did get out of his car, only to return to his car, he spent at least 10 minutes just shining his light into the woods. As I said, I had never been pulled over before, and I was too scared to realize how unusual this was. And my sorry, drunk teenage arse couldn't conceive that I wasn't the center of the universe, and that maybe whatever was happening didn't involve me at all. I thought that maybe he thought that I threw something into the woods, you know, something illegal. But then why wouldn't he just walk over and look, or cuff me first? Then his headlights started to move, and he kinda lurched into the ditch. Not all the way in, but towards it, and I figured he was trying to shoot his headlights toward the trees without sticking the butt of his cruiser into traffic. But it didn't work, and he reversed to straighten out. And then his car slowly inched forward to mine. It went real slow, and he was still shining his light at this nondescript brush between my car and his, but closer to mine. At one point, he stopped again for a good 2 minutes, at least 2 minutes of just pointing his light, and then he resumed inching forward until he was nearly touching the bumper of my Civic. And this time he got out of his car right away, and he quickly walked to my driver's side door, and I rolled down my window, and I'll never forget it. He stuck his head right into my window, with the brim of his hat in my car, and this was the first time I actually saw him. He was younger than I had expected. I don't know why I thought he'd be older, but he couldn't have been much older than me, mid-20s maybe. And he said, "Did you see that?" But he didn't say it like a question. I had been preparing the least drunk way to greet him. "Good evening. How do you do? Willkommen." But his not question and his obvious state of excitement scrapped that plan. So I just said, "See what?" or something like that, trying not to direct my breath at him. He completely ignored me and said that thing had a motor on it, and I had no idea what he was talking about. I thought he meant a bike or something. Again, I was far more concerned with my situation than whatever it was that he was talking about. I think I already said this, but it's so true. I had no idea how absolutely bizarre the situation was until many years later. And while I was figuring out what to say, he abruptly stood up straight and popped his light back at this patch that looked just like everywhere else. He did it really suddenly, as if he was trying to catch the motorbike or whatever it was off guard. Obviously, it struck me as strange. But you have to remember, most of my mental mana was going toward preparing my defense against having my car impounded and being hauled off to Attica. My mom is sick, I have work tomorrow, I pay taxes, I'm a senator's son, all and any of that jazz. So there I was, eye to crotch with this guy. And then instead of doing whatever he was supposed to do, he just started pacing the cars, still shining his mag light at that one spot. At first I thought he was talking to his radio, but it soon became obvious that he was talking to himself. But I believe at one point he said something to me about how it would have to come over the cars, which seemed like a strange thing to suspect a motorcycle to do. After God knows how long, he returned to my window, peeked back in and said, "It ran right behind your car, maybe even touched your car, maybe brushed your damn boot," which I believe means trunk. Now I was starting to worry that I was way more drunk than I thought, but me and the officer were not on the same wavelength at all. At the time, I just couldn't grasp that whatever the cop was talking about was completely independent from me. I thought I was somehow to blame for the motorbike or whatever it was that touched my car. But now I thought maybe I hit a biker or something, or a biker hit me. And if he's in the woods, why isn't the cop going over there? I was very confused. And then to make matters worse, he said, "It's still there. I swear I can see it." And now his face is more just like amused or perplexed. Kind of amused, but maybe a little giddy. Maybe nervous, but giddy at the same time. I turned to look at where he was spotlighting, and there was nothing. Just lit up trees with bushes that looked indistinguishable from either side. And I should note, this was technically a residential area, but it was still very foresty. The border with West Virginia and Pennsylvania definitely has the feel of driving through thick woods. I told him that I don't see it, even though I had no idea what it was. Again, he ignored me, and he said, "I swear I can hear it." He looked in my window again and said something about how big it was, and then he kinda snapped out of it. Honestly, I think it was because he happened to see me holding my license and registration, and I think he realized how weird this must seem from my perspective. We made eye contact and he blinked at me. I remember that well. He just kind of blinked. Like a light went off, and he went from a giddy little kid making exasperated sounds and incoherent statements to a police officer, though he was actually pretty friendly. He apologized and said it's just that he saw something. I asked what he saw, not because I cared, but because that's what a not drunk person would say. And he just shook his head and chuckled, but the chuckle turned kind of dark at the end. He said he has an idea, but that maybe he shouldn't say. And he just kind of kept saying, "Wow, oh my God, wow." And he asked me if I really didn't see it, and he looked at me incredulously, like he didn't believe me or he was checking my face for lies. And I said nothing, and hoped that my face would exude honesty. I've been told that I look very innocent. Mind you, in contrast of my behavior. Anyway, if he was going to be suspicious about me, I'd rather it be about this petty mystery, and not the felony. Then he told me I was going 16 miles over the speed limit, and to slow down. I remember it clearly. He said, "Slow down. I mean it." And this is yet another mystery because I'm pretty sure that the speed limit was 45, and I was going 46. But whatever. Regardless, my stomach plunged with relief. I was getting out of this, I was almost certain. I knew it. He gave me one last terrifying look, and went to his cruiser. He never took my license and registration, which I had on my lap. I started my car and drove with more care than the first cut of a surgeon's career, and it was like I had forgotten how to drive. I was shaking from the nerves. As soon as I saw those lights behind me, probably a half hour ago or more, part of me had already made peace with the fact that I was going to jail, so the relief was just profound. It's hard to explain, but that night 21 years ago, to me, was the night that I got extremely lucky. That was the central theme of the memory for the longest time. And it's funny because the few people I told about it all had the same question, and I just did not care about the answer. I'd say something like, I got pulled over drunk as a skunk, but the cop let me go because he got distracted by something in the ditch. And without fail, the response was always, well, what did he see? And that's what I've been trying to point out to you. My brain wasn't in curiosity, analytical, or mystery mode. I was just thinking, how do I get out of this? Plain and simple. It's a good example of the phrase, where's your head at? When people asked what he saw, my response was like, you're missing the point of the story. And they were like, no, you're missing the point of the story. So fast forward 20 years, or 21 years, my 12-year-old son is obsessed with this devilishly handsome YouTuber named Bob Gimlin. And he's always spouting out Bigfoot facts, like dermal ridges can't be faked, that kind of thing. And I was listening to one of your videos in the background, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't even thought about that story in years. It was just a crazy memory from my crazy days. But now, in hindsight, I think the officer probably did see a Bigfoot. What else could it have been? He wouldn't have acted that way with a bear or a person, or certainly not a bike. So from his perspective, here's what happened. He sees a young kid speed by with out-of-state plates. He waits a minute for whatever reason, and then pursues. I pull over. He gets out of his car, takes a few steps toward my car, and then this giant thing cuts right in front of him, from one side of the street to the other. I saw him probably halfway between his car and mine. And he said the thing was so close to my car that it may have even touched my trunk. And if our cars were parked 30 or 40 feet apart, and he was halfway to my car, then whatever it was probably ran just 5 or 10 feet in front of him, which would explain his excitement. That's really close. Imagine walking up to a dark car, and a Bigfoot sprints right past you. So he freaks out, and understandably so. So he retreats to his cruiser. Maybe he was considering calling for backup, but didn't know what to say. Maybe he was worried that he'd put me in harm's way, and he sees movement in the woods where it ran to, so he lights it up, perhaps trying to confirm what his eyes saw, but his brain refused. Whether or not he could actually see it, or if it was adrenaline playing tricks on him, that's up in the air as far as I'm concerned. Would a Bigfoot lurk just behind some cover while being spotlighted? I don't know, but my guess would be no. So he tries to angle his cruiser so that the headlights will be aimed at the spot. But the shoulder's narrow, and he can't do it without sticking his rear bumper in traffic, and the road is windy. So he pulls his cruiser up to my car, literally within inches, maybe so that he didn't have to walk exposed to the woodline, to make a literal barrier between him and it. This makes more sense in retrospect. In fact, I'm quite certain I remember him saying something about how it would have to come over the cars. And when he came to talk to me, I have the impression that he assumed that I saw it, which I did not. And maybe I should have saw it, but he didn't realize that my entire life was collapsing in around me at the time, and that the totality of my focus was dedicated to willing my blood alcohol level lower. So when he was standing there spotlighting it, I don't know if he could see it, but in his mind I'm sure he could. I think he was subconsciously looking for me to confirm that his brain didn't just play an impossible prank on him. But again, my worries were elsewhere. The cop would not take his eyes off that one spot. Even when he talked to me, he would only say a few words, and then dart his head back up to look. It's like he had an exact location, or feature, and he didn't want to risk losing it. Then when he realized that I'd been pulled over for who knows how long, half an hour maybe, and he hadn't even addressed it yet, And I think that happened when he blinked at me, and I suspect that at that moment, he realized I'd been drinking. I have no doubt the inside of my car smelled like a bottle of Jameson, and I think whatever he saw on the road was so profound that it distracted his senses for all that time. This might be me being overly analytical, but I think when he blinked at me, he was actively computing what the future would be like for us, maybe imagining what a lawyer would sound like describing his behavior to a judge. And then maybe he thought about just exactly what he'd have to say to justify his behavior. Potentially, he was weighing just how drunk is too drunk to let someone drive off without them being a risk to themselves or others. And I think that's why his parting words to me were, "Slow down, I mean it." Imagine his guilt if 10 miles down the road I slammed my Civic into a crosswalk of nuns or something. But 10 miles down the road was West Virginia, so not his problem either way. I don't know. This epiphany about a Bigfoot encounter hit me in 2 seconds flat while listening to one of your videos. And you want to know the craziest part? A few days after all this went down, I told a buddy of mine from work all about it, another line cook at the restaurant I worked at, and I remember he laughed and said, "I think Bigfoot got you out of a DUI," and we laughed about it, and though it was funny, he was obviously serious. And he told me about his cousins in the panhandle of West Virginia. He said that Bigfoot is very real to them, and they take it seriously, as in a safety concern. I didn't think much of that at all because this guy, Ricky was his name, was a very colorful character, and I'd be surprised if he isn't in prison by now. I can't say for certain that it was a Bigfoot that alarmed this officer so much, but I think he saw a Bigfoot, which is weird to say because I'm not even sure Bigfoot exists. But I've been thinking about it a lot these past few months. I don't think it could have been a prank, for obvious reasons, either by him or on him. As far as him pranking me, I guess most importantly would be his job. You know what I mean? Police can certainly have a sense of humor, but using their authority to mess with people is a big no-no, I'd imagine, especially with him being so young. Plus, I wasn't biting. If he was trying to freak me out, it should have been obvious that it wasn't working, and I'd hazard to say that no one is that good of an actor. He was really geeking out, and no cop would let a drunk person drive away over a stupid prank. At least, that's my opinion. As for him being pranked, I don't know who in their right mind would sprint across the street, wearing a monkey suit, 10 feet in front of a police officer. That's the kind of thing you get shot for, and no one even feels bad about it because it was such a stupid thing to do. But more seriously, for this thing to be as alarming as it was, I think it would have had to have been big, or something. Something about it made the cop confident that it wasn't a person. And that's hard to hoax. Something about what he saw was unprecedented in his training. And if it was something he could identify, I think he would have said that. And I imagine he was going back and forth on whether or not to call dispatch, and what to say if he did. I don't think it could have been an animal. There are definitely black bears and deer, and all sorts of creatures, but he wouldn't have reacted like that if that's what he saw, if it had just been a bear. As much as I hate being rational, I think the only other possibilities are that he had a psychotic episode, like a delusion or a hallucination, or he was on a substance that he maybe wasn't used to. The skeptic would probably lean toward those options. Though to be clear, that wasn't my impression at all, but I suppose it's possible. I really wish this would have happened to me when I was sober, and just got pulled over for speeding. That way, I probably would have been less self-absorbed, and I could have probed him for more info. It was obvious that he was itching to talk about whatever it was that he saw, but unfortunately, I was itching to get the heck out of there. I don't know what he saw, but I know it passed within a few feet of where I was sitting. He saw something he couldn't wrap his head around, something that frightened and excited him. I'm sure about that. And after I lost sight of the cruiser, I would bet my Roth IRA that his flashlight turned back on. Okay, hi, back to me. These encounters are rather unsensational compared to many of the tales out there, but for some reason, these are my favorite type of incidents. Big sensational stuff, or sensational interactions, I guess, must occur, don't get me wrong, just as they do with bears or primates or anything else. But keep in mind that for every sensational story about these two very real and proven creatures, there's 10,000 more encounters that are hardly worth a mention, and I suspect that that would be the same for Bigfoot. For every sensational story, there's 1,000 more minute and vague encounters hanging out in the ether. Not to mention, for a creature that matches the description of the subject in question, that is, a creature that is cryptic and cunning, It makes sense to me that accounts like this one would make up the overwhelming majority of human-Sasquatch interaction, events that are ambiguous. Big in the moment, but not much to write home about. Perhaps earth-shattering to one, but only mildly out of the ordinary to another, running the gambit between mind-bending and imperceptible, entirely dependent on a plethora of minute detail. I think all creatures know what they can get away with, but I think with Sasquatch-type creatures, this is taken up a few notches, because they probably have some awareness that the repercussions for their actions extend beyond the individual, and that the ramification of their deeds very well may impact the entire population, or even maybe the entire species, depending on how much credit you afford to them. So what are the options here? As far as a prank, it's possible that the officer was trying to freak this young man out, though I can't see why. Having a badge, I can think of a few far easier ways to accomplish this. Though still unlikely, I think it's slightly more probable that the cop was pranked. Someone in a costume was prepared to sprint across the road, and when he happened to see someone get pulled over, he couldn't resist the urge to dart in front of the officer. From my perspective, this is even more unlikely than the alternative that we all quietly suspect, but still possible. A factor that detracts from the prank possibility, though, is that I fundamentally believe that when people see a person in an ape costume, we see just that, a person in an ape costume. I know some are better than others, and there's great variance, but generally speaking, it's just that we're so good at identifying the human shape and all the other accompanying nuances that we would struggle to articulate, but that we know when we see. And of course, the opposite is true too. There are nuances about the fundamental human shape that are equally frightening when absent. So I would ask you, is there some ballsy prankster who would actually run 10 feet in front of a cop in a Bigfoot suit? Honestly, yes, I'm sure there is. Probably. Would the performance be convincing enough to rattle an armed adult? Possibly, yeah. Is that the most likely explanation? I would say absolutely not, though many would say it has to be. Option 3. The man who emailed me lied. It's possible. Granted, I didn't speak to him in person or anything, but I've spoken to plenty of people, and throughout my time doing this, I've decided that I'm more than comfortable with the fact that many people have strange experiences. They really do. And it's mind-boggling to me how many people out there will argue against this truth. Unexplainable things happen. They really do. Though I would argue that they're only unexplainable at this current juncture. But, obviously, I acknowledge that all people are capable of lying. In fact, option 4 would be that I'm lying, and I just made this up. I know that's not the case, but from your perspective, it's certainly a possibility. And I'd like to take this opportunity to mention something. I've said this before, but I think I should probably start saying it once or twice a year. I get so many comments on my channel asking, why do all these reports sound like they were written by the same person? That's because I write them. I get the email, I read it, I ask my follow-up questions, sometimes I talk further, and then I put it all together in my style. I have no idea why this is so controversial to people, but I'm actually pretty proud of how I managed to, keep my narrative quite consistent. All the little character stuff I put in there is very accurate to the person that I'm communicating with. Because to me, that's the hard part for any content like this. How do I get the point across in a way that's compelling, entertaining, and accurate? I think that's the challenge of these types of videos, and I think I'm fairly decent at it, and I'm kind of proud of that. So when people say, he obviously wrote this, yes, I say yes I did. Yes, I do. Which then worries me because I don't know where people think other stuff comes from. Everything was written at some point. Unless, of course, you're watching an interview, and even that's typically rehearsed in some fashion, so I don't know. So I don't know what to tell you. But a lot of it is direct, just so we're clear. Anyway, I just wanted to address that. Option 5. A spontaneous hallucination or delusion brought on by a substance or medical event. Possible, even though I personally don't think that really happens. At least, not in the way described here. Madness is a slow descent, not a singular instance or event. That's a haiku. Option number 6. The officer misidentified a bear or something. And I find this highly unlikely. Quadrupeds just don't elicit the same gut reaction as bipeds. Or as an unidentifiable biped, maybe I should say. I've had my path aggressively crossed by deer at close range, and it is surprising and startling. It's actually even scary. But in a jump scare sort of way, not in a mysterious way. And before anyone mentions the rare case of the bipedal bear, they can't sprint, certainly would not be described as having, quote, a motor on it. And option 7, of course, it's exactly what it sounds like. I can't think of anything else that fits this puzzle, and I'd be curious to know if you can think of anything else that would, explain this bizarre interaction between the kid and the cop. Let me know if you can think of anything else that would fit. I think the witness hit the nail on the head when he said that the cop probably knew he'd been drinking, but let him go because of whatever it was that happened. Throw a Bigfoot sighting into the case, and just about everything else becomes irrelevant. One aspect of this case that may actually seem like it supports the prank hypothesis is that the officer seemed more fixated on the thing's speed than the thing's size. And in my experience, people tend to be more enamored with the size than anything else. And obviously it would be easier for a hoaxer to be very fast than very large. But don't forget, they have to grow. If we're to believe the size estimates of the adults, then a juvenile is man-sized, which is something to think about when you're in the woods alone at night. I thought of something that the witness didn't mention, and I'm actually asking because I'm curious. Don't police always approach from the opposite side of the road? In my experience, they always stand with the car shielding them from traffic, which would have put his back to the woods, and they never stood between the car and the road. I literally live in a place with the highest DUI rates in the country, so maybe that's just here. I could certainly be wrong, but it's just something I thought of. Feel free to correct me if you know of such things. It was the witness's perception that the cop thought that the creature was still there, hiding out, or hunkering down while the beam of the flashlight was on it, or on the brush it was hiding in. I'm inclined to say that's unlikely, and that's just a result of the officer's adrenaline. But if it knows no one's going to walk over to it, and it knows it can't be seen, why not? Why it would do that, I have no idea. But I'd love to know, because that's probably the key to this mystery. And as usual, the question comes down to why. Why? Why would an alleged, intelligent biped cut 10 feet in front of a police officer, square in between two cars, when it could have easily not been seen at all by just hanging out in the woods, or by walking up or down the road for a spell? And a lot of people like to say protecting an infant or something, but I don't think that checks out here, unless the infant was on the opposite side of the road, and the mother or parent intuited that the infant was about to cross, or show itself, or draw attention to itself. But why would the caring parent be separated by a road from its infant in the first place? So I don't know. I don't think the typical infant response is adequate in explaining this one. It's curious. Why would it do that? If I had to give an answer, and I don't know, but my guess would be because it could. Because it can. Obviously, there was no consequence. Maybe it was doing a bit of thrill-seeking. Maybe in Bigfoot culture, that's a challenge, or an assertion of dominance. Maybe it's a way to say I want you gone. But it seems like a strange way to go about doing that. It says I'm fast, and I can get close to you. I can be on top of you before you know it, and I'm not afraid of you. Maybe it was rebelling against its Bigfoot parents. Maybe it was trying to confront its own fears. If this creature is as mentally developed as it must be to exist at all, then mundane explanations are inappropriate. Anyway, make sure to like this video. That would mean the world to me. And make sure you're subscribed. That is by far the best way to help me continue to make content. And anyway, again, and as always, thanks an awful lot for listening.